Hey everyone, welcome back. We're going deep on a book today called Heads I Win, Tails You Lose by Patrick Donahoe.
Oh, yeah, this one is really interesting.
It is. It's all about kind of challenging how we think about building wealth and reaching financial freedom.
Yeah, and he's not just giving tips or anything like that.
Right.
He really wants us to rethink how we view some pretty basic things like retirement and, the role of traditional financial institutions.
Exactly. And especially for those of you listening in Deer Park, LaPorte, or Pasadena, that think and act locally mindset is so important. We want to make sure we're making smart choices for ourselves, but also for our community.
Yeah.
I think that's where Donahoe's ideas can really hit home.
Yeah, for sure. What's interesting is Dono himself actually, he's got quite a background. He's worked with some big names like Big Four accounting firms, Fortune 1000 companies, even as a rich dad advisor. But his aha moment, so to speak, really came during a personal financial crisis back in 2008.
Oh, wow. So this isn't just theory for him. He's been in the trenches.
Yeah, absolutely.
What was it about that crisis that led him to develop this perpetual wealth strategy?
Well, it really forced him to question everything he thought he knew about money. And that's where this idea of creator destruction comes in.
Okay.
He realized he needed to tear down his old assumptions and build a new strategy from scratch.
Wow.
And that strategy has three core components: taking control of your wealth, building those passive income streams, and finding work that you're actually passionate about, work that's meaningful to you.
Now, this already sounds like it goes against the grain of how a lot of us were raised to think about money, but is this achievable, for the average person?
That's the thing. That's the core of his message, is that financial freedom, it is achievable for anyone. It just takes the effort to learn.
Okay.
He doesn't want us to rely on Wall Street or the government for our financial well-being.
Right.
He wants us to take control, become financially literate, and, make our money work for us.
Yeah. Okay, so what about traditional retirement planning? Most of us are told to invest in our 401ks and trust the system, but Donahoe seems to have a different take on that.
Yeah, he's very critical of Wall Street.
Really?
Yeah, he thinks that the system, the way 401ks are structured, they often benefit the financial institutions more than the individual investors.
So we're playing by their rules, even if those rules aren't always in our best interest.
Exactly. He argues that Wall Street is primarily focused on fees and profits.
Okay.
And he even points out that, that advice to dollar cost average into mutual funds, which a lot of people think is a really sound strategy.
Yeah.
It doesn't really fully protect you from the impact of fees and taxes.
Oh, wow. So even when we think we're making smart moves, there's this whole other system working behind the scenes that we might not be aware of.
Yeah, it can be really eye-opening.
It is.
And he wants us to see through that system and really understand how it works. He points out that most mutual fund managers, they underperform compared to the S&P 500.
Oh, wow.
And even Warren Buffett has said this, you're paying these high fees for returns that might not even beat the market.
Okay, so if we're not supposed to just blindly trust Wall Street and 401k, what's the alternative? What does Donahoe suggest we do?
Well, his solution is something he calls the wealth maximization account, or WMA.
A wealth maximization account. That sounds almost too good to be true.
I know, right?
What is that?
So it's basically a specially structured whole life insurance policy that's designed to build wealth and provide financial security. And he argues that it's just a much more stable and controlled way to grow your money than, relying on the volatile stock market.
Hold on. Insurance as a wealth building tool. That seems a bit unconventional. Most people think of insurance as an expense, not an investment.
Right. It definitely goes against the grain. But he makes a really compelling argument about how insurance, specifically whole life insurance, can be a really powerful asset.
I'm intrigued, but I'm also a little skeptical. A lot of financial experts, they criticize whole life insurance. How does he address those concerns?
Well, he acknowledges the criticisms, but he says that they're often based on misunderstandings or a lack of understanding of how these policies really work. And he points to the historical use of life insurance for savings and wealth building, especially before 401ks became so common.
So he's saying it's kind of like going back to a more traditional way of building wealth.
Yeah, exactly.
Interesting.
And he highlights those tax advantages, tax-free death benefits, tax-deferred growth, tax-free policy loans.
Right.
These features, he says, make it a much more efficient way to grow and protect your wealth than traditional investment accounts.
Okay, that makes sense. But, some people, they might still be wary of putting their money into an insurance product. Are there risks with these WMAs?
Well, like any financial product, there's always going to be nuances, but, he emphasizes that insurance companies are very heavily regulated and they have to maintain these huge reserves to make sure that they're financially stable.
Right.
So he argues that WMAs, they offer a level of security and predictability that's really hard to find in the stock market.
So it's about finding that balance between risk and reward.
Exactly.
And he believes that WMAs offer a more stable and controlled approach to building wealth.
Exactly. And it's not just about personal savings.
Right.
He also talks about leveraging them to fund real estate investments, capitalize businesses, even create like innovative employee benefit plans.
Wow, so this WMA concept, it seems to be like the cornerstone of his whole financial philosophy.
Yeah.
It's like building a financial fortress that you control rather than relying on these external institutions.
I love that analogy. That's a great way to put it. He wants us to be active participants in our financial lives, not just passive observers.
Yeah.
Understand the rules of the game and make decisions that are aligned with our values and our goals.
Right, and that really aligns with our Think and Act Locally spirit.
Yeah.
Here in Deer Park, LaPorte, and Pasadena. It's about taking ownership, making choices that benefit our community.
Absolutely. It's about empowering ourselves with knowledge and making those smart choices that are going to have like a ripple effect of positive change.
Yeah, we've really just scratched the surface of this book. There's so much more to unpack. But before we move on, let's just take a step back and kind of recap what we've learned so far.
Okay, so Donahoe's main argument is that true financial freedom comes from taking control of your wealth and building a life that's based on purpose and meaning. He criticizes that traditional reliance on Wall Street and 401ks because he says they often prioritize profits over the individual investor's best interests.
Right.
And he presents this WMA as a powerful alternative, a tool for building wealth, protecting your assets, and achieving financial security.
So it's about questioning the status quo, educating ourselves, and then taking action to build a better financial future for ourselves and for our community.
Exactly. And it all starts with understanding, the rules of the game and becoming financially literate so we can make those informed decisions that align with our values and our goals.
Now I'm really curious to hear more about how this WMA works in practice. Like, how do you actually build one and use it to achieve your financial goals? I think that's where our listeners in Deer Park, LaPorte, and Pasadena are going to really start to see how Donahoe's ideas can apply to their own lives.
Yeah. Absolutely. And that's where it gets really interesting.
Okay.
He has a very specific framework for how to structure and leverage a WMA.
Okay.
And we'll get into those details in the next part of our deep dive and see how they can be translated into actionable steps for everyone listening.
Sounds good. Let's take a quick break and we'll be right back with more insights from Heads I Win, Tails You Lose.
So welcome back, everyone. Before the break, we were talking about Donahoe's alternative approach to wealth building and specifically the wealth maximization account.
Right. And I think a lot of our listeners are really eager to hear like the specifics. How does this WMA actually work? It's one thing to talk about challenging Wall Street, but what do we actually do instead?
Right. Especially, for folks here in Deer Park, LaPorte, Pasadena, they want those practical steps they can take to improve their own financial lives.
Exactly.
That's where the WMA gets really interesting. So think of it this way. Instead of sending your money off to Wall Street and just hoping for the best, you're basically creating your own personal banking system.
Okay. I like where this is going, but how does a life insurance policy become a banking system? That's not how most people think about insurance.
Right. That's what's so ingenious about it. So remember how we talked about the cash value component of whole life insurance?
Yeah.
That's really the key here. So that cash value grows over time. It's protected from, the ups and downs of the market, and you can access it through what are called policy loans.
So you're borrowing from yourself, essentially.
Exactly. And the interest that you pay on those loans, it often goes back into the policy, so it further increases the cash value.
So it's like a closed loop system where your money is just constantly working for you.
Exactly. It's not just sitting there. It's actively growing, and you have access to it when you need it.
Wow. Okay. So this is starting to make more sense to me now. And is there anything else that makes these loans unique?
Yeah. So another key point that Donahoe brings up is that policy loans, they're often at a much more favorable rate than you would find with a traditional bank loan.
Oh, that's a huge advantage, especially if you're using those loans to finance investments like he talks about.
Right, exactly. He sees the WMA as like a foundation for building wealth.
Right.
So
Right.
you build up that cash value, and then you can use that cash value to invest in income-producing assets.
Like real estate, for instance. He
Yeah.
seems to be a big fan of owning rental properties.
Oh, he loves real estate. He really does. And he has a couple of strategies for how to use your WMA to get into the real estate game.
Okay.
One option is to use a policy loan for the down payment on an investment property.
So you're using your own money,
Yeah.
essentially, money that's already working for you within the WMA to acquire an asset that will generate passive income.
Exactly. And then over time, that rental income that you're making can be used to pay back the policy loan, and it just keeps growing your cash value.
Yeah.
It's a way to really leverage your existing assets to build even more wealth.
Wow, this is starting to click for me now. It's like a snowball effect.
Yeah.
You build up the WMA, then you use it to acquire assets that generate income,
Yeah.
and that income flows back into the WMA, making it even stronger.
I love that that's a perfect way to put it. And he doesn't just stop at real estate either.
Okay.
He also talks about using WMAs to capitalize businesses.
Oh, interesting. So instead of going to a bank for a traditional business loan, you could use a policy loan from your WMA.
Exactly. It's a way to access capital on your own terms without all those stringent requirements and high interest rates that often come with bank loans.
Right. And this could be a real game changer for small business owners, especially right here in our community. In Deer Park, LaPorte, Pasadena, access to capital is often a major hurdle for entrepreneurs.
Absolutely.
So this could be a much more accessible and flexible option.
For sure. And he even goes a step further. He suggests that employers can use WMAs to create innovative employee benefit plans.
Oh, that's interesting. Most of us are just used to traditional 401ks. What kind of benefits is he talking about?
Well, he talks about things like non-qualified deferred compensation plans, or 409A plans for short.
Okay.
Essentially, it allows an employer to set aside a portion of an employee's compensation to be paid out later, often during retirement.
Okay, so it's like a bonus that grows over time and gives them a nice little nest egg.
Exactly. And he suggests funding these plans using WMAs, which again can offer tax advantages for both the employer and the employee.
So win-win for everyone involved.
Exactly. And then he also talks about split dollar arrangements.
Split dollar arrangement.
Yeah, it's a little bit more complex, but basically it involves the employer and the employee sharing the cost and the benefits of a life insurance policy.
Okay, so it's a way to structure a policy that provides benefits to both parties.
Exactly. And it can be a really valuable tool for attracting and retaining top talent, especially in really competitive industries. He even shares an example of a big-time football coach who used a split dollar arrangement as part of his compensation package.
Yeah.
And it really highlights those potential tax advantages and the flexibility that these types of arrangements can offer.
So these are strategies that are being used at the highest levels of, professional sports.
Mm-hmm.
That's pretty impressive.
It is. It shows how versatile this whole concept can be. It's
Okay.
not just about personal savings. It's about rethinking the whole way we approach finances, from business capital to employee benefits.
Exactly. And that's a message that I think a lot of people need to hear, especially here in our community.
Yeah.
We're often told to play it safe, trust the system, but he's encouraging us to think outside the box,
Yeah.
take control, and create a financial future that aligns with our own values and our goals.
Absolutely. It's about empowering ourselves with knowledge, making informed decisions, and building a financial foundation that can really support our dreams and aspirations.
Now, I know we've covered a lot here, but I want to make sure we're connecting this back to our Think and Act Locally mission.
Yeah.
How do these strategies, particularly the WMA,
Mhm.
how can they benefit our community as a whole?
That's a great question, and I think the answer lies in the ripple effect.
Okay.
When individuals achieve financial security, it strengthens their families. They can support local businesses. It creates a more stable and prosperous community overall.
So it's not just about individual wealth. It's about creating a positive impact that goes beyond just ourselves.
Exactly. And that's something that Donahoe really emphasizes throughout the book. He believes that financial freedom, it's not just about personal gain. It's about using your resources to make a positive impact in the world.
Right. It's about taking control of your finances so that you can actually live a life of purpose and meaning. A life where you can contribute to something bigger than yourself.
Exactly. And that resonates so deeply with what we're trying to do here at Think and Act Locally. We believe that by empowering individuals to achieve that financial freedom, we're creating a stronger, more vibrant community.
Absolutely. Now, I know we focused a lot on the WMA so far, but his book has so many other valuable insights and strategies.
Yeah.
He talks about the importance of investing in real estate, building those passive income streams. He even challenges the whole traditional notion of retirement.
Yeah, he envisions this future where people can pursue meaningful work.
Right.
They can continue to contribute to society, live lives filled with purpose and passion regardless of their age.
It's inspiring and it's empowering.
It is.
And I think it's a vision that a lot of people here in Deer Park, LaPorte, Pasadena share.
Absolutely.
We're a community of hardworking, resilient people who are always looking for ways to improve our lives and make a positive impact.
And his book provides a real roadmap for achieving that vision.
Yeah.
It's a reminder that we have the power to create our own financial futures, to build wealth, achieve security, and use those resources to make a real difference in the world.
And, before we move on to the next segment, I want to address something that I think some listeners might be wondering about.
Okay.
This all sounds great, but building a WMA and implementing these strategies, it can seem a bit complex.
Right.
So where can people go for help and guidance?
Yeah, that's a valid concern, and he really emphasizes the importance of finding a qualified financial professional. Someone who really understands his approach.
Okay.
It's not about trying to figure this out all on your own.
Right.
It's about finding that trusted advisor who can help you tailor these strategies to your specific needs and goals.
So it's about finding someone who shares your values and understands your vision for the future.
Exactly. And that's something we're really passionate about here at Think and Act locally.
Right.
We want to connect our listeners with resources and professionals who can help them reach those goals and create that positive impact that we're talking about.
So it's about building a network of support, surrounding yourself with people who can help you navigate this journey and make those smart decisions.
Right. That's a key part of the Think and Act locally philosophy.
Yeah.
It's about working together, supporting each other, creating a community where everyone has that opportunity to thrive.
Now, in the next part of our deep dive, we're going to really dig into some more of Donahoe's specific strategies for building wealth
Yes.
and achieving that financial freedom.
Can't wait.
We'll get into things like his concept of the hierarchy of wealth, his approach to real estate investing, and his insights on how to create a life of purpose and meaning.
It's going to be a great conversation. I hope everyone sticks around for it.
Absolutely. We'll be right back. All right, so welcome back to our deep dive into Heads I Win, Tails You Lose. We've been talking about some really powerful ideas, about taking control of our financial futures.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I'm excited to keep exploring this, especially, for our listeners in Deer Park, LaPorte, Pasadena, that Think and Act locally.
Yeah.
Spirit is so strong here, and I think this message can really resonate.
I think so too. And in this segment, we're going to get into some more specific strategies that Donahoe outlines in the book. And one of the most interesting ones is something he calls the hierarchy of wealth.
Okay. The hierarchy of wealth. I mean, that sounds a little bit like a pyramid scheme or something.
It's not a pyramid scheme at all. It's actually a really smart approach to building wealth. So he breaks down investments into 4 tiers based on the level of risk and control.
Okay, break it down for me. What are those tiers?
All right, so tier 1 is like the foundation of the hierarchy.
Yeah.
And that's all about having those guaranteed liquid assets. So this is where your WMA comes in.
So it's about having that secure base.
Exactly.
That safety net that you can rely on no matter what the market's doing.
Exactly. It's about building that financial fortress that you control that's protected from the volatility of the stock market.
Okay, that makes sense. So once you've got that solid tier 1 foundation in place, what comes next?
All right, so tier 2, that focuses on what he calls controllable assets. So things like real estate and even personal development.
Real estate, we've talked about that. He's big on, owning rental properties that can generate that passive income. But what about personal development? How does that fit in?
Well, he actually argues that investing in yourself, in your skills, your knowledge is just as important as investing in, traditional assets.
Okay.
And he brings up the work of Jason Hartman, who has a great podcast called Creating Wealth Show.
Okay.
And Hartman talks a lot about building what he calls your human capital.
It's about increasing your earning potential.
Exactly.
Acquiring skills and knowledge that can help you create more wealth and opportunities.
Exactly. It ties back to that idea that, financial freedom is about more than just money.
Right.
It's about having the resources and the skills to pursue what you're passionate about.
Yeah.
Make a difference and live a life of purpose.
And again, that ties in really nicely with our Think and Act locally philosophy. It's about empowering individuals to reach their full potential and contribute to our community.
Absolutely. All right. So once you've got a solid foundation in tier 1 and tier 2, then you can start to explore some of those higher risk, higher reward investments in tier 3.
Okay. So this is where it gets A little bit more
A
adventurous.
little bit.
What are we talking about here?
So this is where you might consider things like, hard money lending.
Okay.
Maybe for real estate projects or syndicated investments in commodities.
So it's about diversifying your portfolio, exploring different asset classes,
Mhm.
and, potentially accelerating that wealth building journey.
Exactly, but he really emphasizes that you should only consider Tier 3 investments after you've built that solid foundation in Tier 1 and Tier 2.
It's about managing risk,
Mm-hmm.
not putting your security at risk by chasing those high returns in investments that are more speculative.
Absolutely. And then finally, you have Tier 4, which is really reserved for the most speculative investments. So things like, high-risk stocks, options, futures.
So this is the proceed with caution zone,
Pretty much.
where you could potentially lose a lot of money.
Yeah, you could lose everything.
Okay.
So he advises, don't put a big chunk of your wealth into those Tier 4 investments, especially if you're getting closer to retirement or just looking for that overall financial stability.
It's about knowing your risk tolerance
Mm-hmm.
and, not letting that kind of allure of quick riches,
Mm-hmm.
derail your long-term financial well-being.
Exactly. And this whole hierarchy of wealth framework, it's a great way to visualize, how to build a balanced and resilient financial strategy.
So start with a solid foundation,
Yeah,
and then you can kind of gradually expand your portfolio as your wealth and knowledge grow.
exactly. And, understanding that financial freedom, it's not just about how much money you have.
Right.
It's about how you manage it and how you use it to create the life that you want.
And that's a message that I think is really important for our listeners in Deer Park, LaPorte, and Pasadena.
Mm-hmm.
We're a community that values hard work, responsibility,
Mm-hmm.
making a positive impact.
And Donahoe's approach really aligns with those values.
It does.
It's about creating a financial future that supports your goals, your dreams, your aspirations.
It's about building a life where you're in control,
Mm.
you have the resources to pursue your passions, and you can make a difference in the world.
Absolutely. It's about financial empowerment, taking ownership of your future and creating a life that's fulfilling and impactful.
Now, I know we've covered a lot today, and some of this can seem complex, but I want to encourage everyone listening, keep learning, keep exploring. Don't be afraid to ask questions.
There are resources out there.
There are.
Donahoe's book, his website, and remember, finding a trusted advisor who really understands his approach can make a huge difference.
It's all about building that network of support.
Mm-hmm.
Surrounding yourself with people who can help you navigate this journey and make those informed decisions.
And that's something we're really passionate about here at Think and Act Locally. We want to connect our listeners with those resources and that support to reach their goals and create a more prosperous future for themselves and for our community.
We believe that everyone, regardless of their income or their background, has the potential to achieve financial freedom.
Absolutely.
It's about taking that first step, educating yourself, making a plan, and taking action.
And remembering that financial freedom, it's a journey, not a destination.
Right.
It's about continuous learning, growth, and adaptation.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into heads I win, tails you lose, I want to leave our listeners with a challenge. Take one step today, no matter how small, to move towards those goals. Read Donahoe's book, talk to a financial advisor, or even just start a simple budget.
And remember, you're not alone in this. There are resources available, people who want to help, and a whole community here to support you.
We believe in you, and we believe in the power of our community to create a brighter future for everyone. Think and Act Locally is a podcast empowering residents of Deer Park, LaPorte, and Pasadena, Texas, to improve their lives and community in Levy. We serve the Southeast Houston area with actionable information for local impact. If you find value in our show, please support us at thinkandactlocally.com/donate, link in show notes.